All right, welcome back to episode 2 of the Filipino podcast, hosted by me, Hannah, and my co-host, Norman.
Hey, I'm Norman. I hope you remember me. What's up?
Of course I remember you. This is our podcast. We're like sharing platform here. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and get started with the very first stream. I keep saying stream. This is the next segment. Okay, so this is a small warm-up, quote-unquote, exercise that I prepared for Norman and I. It's called Who Is Not Filipino. I think I mentioned this a little briefly in episode 1, where we have 6 Filipinos versus 1 secret white guy from Jubilee. I feel like this is such a good conversation to be had about this in particular because there's something that they say here that really stands out to me. So I'm gonna go ahead and play the video.
I'm Filipino.
I'm Filipino.
I'm Filipino.
I'm Filipino.
I'm Filipino.
I'm Filipino.
And I'm Canadian.
Okay, so we have that intro, and we're gonna jump into 319, which was my first one.
The beach and the mountains, we got a little mix. My dad is from Pangasinan. My mom is from Bulacan, I think. I'm not too sure, but I was born and raised in the Philippines for, I would say, 10 years. And I moved here about, I would say, when I was 14.
So you guys have all been to the Philippines?
Yes.
Yeah, I was there in December.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm the only one who hasn't been there.
You've never
you
been?
gotta
Never
go to the
been.
But I'm
motherland.
fluent with the language.
So when Mark said that he had never been to the Philippines, but he speaks Tagalog,
So the thing is, John says, when he speaks, he's never been to the motherland, but he speaks Tagalog. But the guy didn't actually say he speaks Tagalog, right? He said, I'm fluent with the language.
Oh yeah, he
Right?
didn't say Tagalog, but he did say I'm fluent with the language. Yeah.
Yes, that's what I want to point out there. When he said that, I was like, okay, how does he know that automatically fluent with the language equals Tagalog? How did he make that connection? That's the biggest thing that I wanted to highlight, right? Right? That's what I was saying. I'm like, okay, so he said, oh, I'm fluent with the language. And he said, oh, when Mark said, I think his name was Mark, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I was there in December.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm the only one who hasn't been there.
you've never
you
been?
gotta
Never
go to the
been.
But I'm
motherland.
fluent with the language.
So when Mark said that he had never been to the Philippines, but he speaks Tagalog,
Yeah, so yeah, that really stood out to me. I was like, why do you have to say that Mark speaks the language? He didn't say
Tagalog.
He didn't say Tagalog though. That's the thing that I wanted to point out.
Yeah, but the John says that he speaks Tagalog.
Right. And then but Mark says I'm fluent with the language. So it wasn't
With
specified
the
which one.
language.
Yeah, that's what I want to
Which
highlight.
language?
Yes. Yes. So why is it that they say automatically language equals Tagalog? Which is very, very interesting to me. Because of course it does make sense that Tagalog is a national language, but so is English too. You know? So it's like, okay, which one is a language then? That's the question. But of course, since they're all speaking English, why would they address English, you know? So we're gonna jump into the second part of the video, which you kindly highlighted for me. I'm gonna go over here.
I struggle with the language a lot because I grew up with like TFC playing in the house. And like, I would see a lot of like Filipino dramas, but then my parents also speak Ilonggo, a different dialect. So like I get mixed up on what is Ilonggo and what's Tagalog, but like
Okay, so another thing I wanted to highlight here. What did this person say?
Well, first of all, he says he watched TFC, the Filipino channel where we got our name, TFP.
Yeah.
Secondly, he watches drama. He watches drama, and I think his mom speaks Ilonggo, and he said his mom speaks Ilonggo, which is a different dialect. And then he goes on by saying that, and then I got confused, which is Ilonggo, which is Tagalog, basically.
Yes. Yes, that's so true. And I understand this person's experience. I forgot his name, and I'm so sorry. I come from that kind of home too. I grew up with watching TFC on the TV. My sister and I used to watch it every day when we came home from school because that's what's playing on in the living room whenever we're there. And basically, my sister and I, we also kind of perceive, like, you know, we never really noticed the difference between Ilonggo and Tagalog. You know, sometimes we would even say Ilonggo phrases, like, for example, like, tulog ka na, right? Is it tulog? How did my dad say it? Is it tulog ka na?
Pagtulog na.
Yeah, pagtulog na. Yeah, I would hear that from my dad, so I got used to hearing that. So when they say go to sleep, they would say pagtulog na. I'm like, okay, I know that expression. That is a language that I know. I just don't know which one it was. I never knew it was Ilonggo until I sat down and asked my dad. I was like, is that Ilonggo or is that Tagalog? Because I think in Tagalog, it's matulog ka na, diba? It's with the ma words, right?
Matulog ka na.
Yeah, that's what I thought. It was just a difference in matulog ka na versus patulog ka na. Or
Pagtulog.
Pagtulog na in Ilonggo, matulog ka na in Tagalog. It's so interesting to hear the difference. So, obviously, me not knowing the difference between them, I would obviously start to extend this mixture of misunderstanding these two languages onto the other ways, or like in my conversation of speech. So I could never tell the difference of, when you hear me speak in Tagalog, or what I claim is Tagalog when I speak to you. Maybe there's a lot of Ilonggo influences that I'm not aware of, because no one indicated to me that was wrong or that's not how you say it. So I don't have an understanding of the Tagalog languages in terms of Ilonggo and Tagalog, for example, being clashed in my head because I mix it to syntax. What did you want to add?
Question for you.
Yeah, go for it.
Was your parents like ever correct you when you speak Tagalog? So, for example, when you not mispronounce, but more like you use a different words. Like, would they say, no, you say this, not that?
Yes.
Did they ever correct you?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. They did. That was very frustrating because I'm like, I can't tell the difference. They just sound the same to me, and that is the most. That's the confusing part and the most frustrating part, because it's like, I'm not gonna lie, I'm gonna be honest, I feel like I'm a corrupted version of Tagalog whenever I speak. Whenever I speak Tagalog to anyone, I always feel that I am a broken version of the Philippine language because I've never received corrections when I was young, and now that I started taking Tagalog classes in college, for example, I feel like it's too late to fix me. And that really it really hurts my pride as a Filipina, because it's like, I was deprived of understanding my homeland, let alone being able to speak the language. I just feel like, what kind of Filipina am I? It just hurts me personally. Even though I understand that my parents always tell me, it's not bad. If you go to the Philippines, people actually look up to you because you speak English really well and you come from the United States. That's definitely embedded into the culture and the history, of course. But at the same time, it just makes me feel like, okay, I feel like I don't know, maybe it feels like it's fueling the imposter syndrome in me. It's like, how can I even be considered high class? Or, how can you see me as someone as like, oh yeah, she's a Filipina and she speaks English so well. She was educated in the US. But it's like, I feel like I don't have the right to be called that when I have nothing to support with my knowledge in the Philippines. That's why I get a little bit jealous of you, Norman, because you have at least some background in the Philippines while growing up. I wasn't even given a chance to go to school in the Philippines. I started school late. I was 4 when I came to the US. I was supposed to jump straight into kindergarten. No, they didn't put me in kindergarten. They put me into preschool because they decided, oh, this girl doesn't know English, even though I understood them. It was just I didn't know how to speak in English with the teachers who were testing me, and I was very shy because I didn't even have a rapport with them. So I kind of felt like at the same time I wasn't given a chance. So because I wasn't put into the right class group, I was held back a grade. That's how I started. And even though I was held back a grade, I still had to take ESL classes on top of that. So I was even further behind, So there's just, I feel like I'm kind of in this whole box of I don't know, I'm always inferior in a way, because it's I'm always behind. I didn't have a right to sleep. I had to go to ESL classes. That's why I have an addiction to play video games. Tying into video games, why? Because they always made me work on a computer that had English games, to practice, to play, to engage, because I didn't know English. So that, in a way, propelled my addiction to playing the computer and using the PC. So while growing up, I've been really into PC games, playing video games and stuff. So I kind of see a lot of the things from when I was little really affecting me as I grow up. So it's just, my perception of seeing myself as a Filipina speaking, it just makes me feel, very frustrated, even sometimes self-conscious too, because like when I want to speak Tagalog, there's also been like, okay, there was one time I had a conversation with a Filipina parent, I think. Maybe, I don't remember if she was my aunt or relative, but basically she told me, you speak English, so just speak English. It kind of made me feel like I'm not allowed to practice my Tagalog around her, or that in a way it kind of made me feel like my Tagalog wasn't good enough to have that conversation with her. So in a way it does affect my self-esteem and confidence in speaking Tagalog to this day, and I can tell you it does still affect me, even though I've always wanted to deny that it does affect me. It does. So sometimes I've become even more self-conscious of, like, sometimes depending on the feel of the conversation, maybe I might speak in Tagalog, sometimes I won't. There's also been cases at my job where there are Filipinas or Filipinos who also visit my work, so I would speak in Tagalog with them just to greet them, and they would get, like, the whole Filipino thing, like, oh my god, uy, Filipino siya, stuff like that. And they're
Filipino pride again.
Yeah, the Filipino pride coming back in again, of course. And it's just, it's nice, but at the same time, it's like, I can't carry a Tagalog conversation anymore, and that freaking infuriates me, And
All right, can I add just like one thing before you move on?
yeah,
I think this is very important to like add that if you don't speak Tagalog or any other languages in the Philippines, it doesn't make you less Filipino, because there are some Filipino or there are some Filipino Americans who cannot speak Tagalog, but they actually understands it, and it kind of infuriates them because they can't speak it, and they always blame their parents. But the parents' reason is that because they don't want their kids to be singled out when they're in school, which makes sense back then, but now it doesn't make sense, and it is kind of sad that they can't speak Tagalog or the other languages. But again, it doesn't make you less Filipino. So I hope that that we should actually erase that stigma. And this is actually one of the very toxic that I see when it comes to like older generations of Filipino. So especially when you meet old Filipino lady and she knows that you're Filipino, and then she asks you, so marunong ka mag-Tagalog? Do you speak Tagalog? And when someone says no, and they would say, oh, that's bad, that's not good, you should learn how to speak Tagalog, which again, not helping, dude. So I think we should just like not do that and just let them have what they have, basically. So if you see yourself as Filipino, you do see it because you actually embrace having having the Filipino culture, and with that too, you are also trying to watch some Filipino shows or news to keep updated on what's happening in the country. And I hope that we actually stop Filipino shaming Filipino Americans, because again, it's helping no one. You think you're helping them, but they are too are frustrated because they don't speak Tagalog. So I just want to point that out. I hope this reaches to every Filipinos in Philippines, because this is a very toxic environment on what they do, basically.
No, I agree with everything you're saying. And I like that you pointed that out, and I'm really grateful that you also, like, in a sense, you do validate me, knowing that, I shouldn't feel ashamed because I don't know Tagalog. Again, it ties into the history of the Philippines once we go into today's podcast, because it's going to tell you so much as to why we perceive language in this kind of way. And just like what you said, it's just like we shouldn't shame people for not knowing Tagalog, and for also if they also know Tagalog, because just like what Norman said, in the early 2000s, something I wanted to share was, it was still around that time where we wanted to have the hot pot or the melting pot perception of language learning. So when people were coming to or immigrating to the US, there was a very strong stigma that you should not teach the other language to your children. And this has been like ongoing for like 200 years or so, right? It goes all the way back to colonization of US territories. They really want the people who are living in the US territories to only know and speak English because that is the dominant language, that is a colonized language. So in that sense, it just made me feel like, we don't really know what children want when they're younger. We don't know, like sometimes there are even children who actually resent going to language classes, but believe me, like maybe 80% out of the 20% of people who went to language class, it is actually super useful to know the language of your culture. Even though if you hate it, especially for children, I'm someone who really encourages like parents that if they want their children to become bilingual, teach them while they're young, even though they might feel frustrated about it. It will help in long term, and of course when they grow older, that is an advantage that like stands out from other people. Being able to be multilingual, from a fluent stance, because you started when you were young. That is a huge advantage compared to people who don't know it from a fluent age. Instead, they acquire it maybe later down in life, past what we call the critical age period, which is around 10 to 13, I think. Past that age, that's usually when the fluency, like when when a child is unable to learn another language, past 10 or 13, that critical age, they are now going to have a much more difficult time acquiring the language. But sure, children still acquire languages easier than adults. They still have more latent elasticity in their brains, and they're able to still pick up patterns much faster than the adults. But it's much better if they were like still under 10 to learn the language, because something about the child's brain, and this is taught in child language development classes. There's something in the child's brain that allows them to learn languages much faster than a student who's over 10 years old or over puberty, and above, and much faster than even adults. They somehow are able to pick it up much faster, because I don't know what it is in the brain. Even scientists to this day are still kind of like mind-boggled by the discovery of how children can acquire languages very, very quickly. I mean, there's even a video of like a 5-year-old girl speaking 7 languages very fluently because she has 7 teachers who teach that. So it goes to show that the brain of children are super, like, they have a lot of potential for language learning. And that's why I'm always like, guys, teach your kids different languages when they're young. And it's also important to note that it doesn't have to be like, oh yeah, they have to learn a language every single day. It can be like, one day is this language, another day for this language, but there needs to be consistency. There needs to be consistency of that figure in their life so they continue to use that language, because if they have no one to speak it to, it disappears. And that is a fact, And what even is kind of scary when it comes to children, and sorry, this is just like a long tangent on this. A final thing to point out about children: if the child decides that the language is not worth learning, they will forget the language. And I think this is very true because it happened to my sister. Because when we both came to the US, my sister and I were very fluent in Tagalog. Like, we could speak it, we had no problem whatsoever. My sister was very good at speaking Tagalog. If we watch our baby videos, you can hear her speak very fluently. It was until towards the end of preschool, she lost it. She can't even speak Tagalog anymore. It's gone. Because something about her at 3 years old, 4 years old, she decided in her head, I don't want to speak Tagalog anymore. I don't know what
there's no use to it to speak Tagalog, or
yes.
Is probably what's going on, because who would she use to speak Tagalog for? Just mom and dad? I mean, they speak English, so I'll speak English to them.
Yeah, that's the thing. Exactly. That's exactly my point. If a child deems that the language is not worth learning, then they are not going to pursue it anymore. They're not going to be fluent anymore. But what will only stick with them is comprehension. They can only understand. That's why there's a lot of people who are especially Philams, who only understand Tagalog is because their parents speak it around them, but their parents don't encourage them to speak it back to them. That is the issue. And that's really important to show there, because the thing is, why did I keep my Tagalog at 4? Why didn't my sister keep it when she turned 4? And the answer there is because I knew Tagalog was my relationship to my parents. I made that decision, and to this day I still remember that I wanted to speak to my parents, so it will always be in Tagalog. So I made that decision as a child. That's why as I grew up, I never lost Tagalog. I still held on to it, even though it's broken, you know? So I would always get labeled like really cute nicknames like Sam Milby English or Sam Milby Tagalog. That's the kind of Tagalog I speak. I even joke around telling people like, oh, how's my Tagalog? I think Sam Milby. It sounds really awkward. But Sam Milby's Tagalog's actually...
Sam Milby yung Tagalog.
Yeah, parang Sam Milby yung Tagalog ko. I would say that. And then they would say, wow. No, they're like, no, hindi. Ang galing yung Tagalog mo. You sound fluent. And I'm like, oh. I forget a lot, you know? Like, mine is more of the maybe Manilena version of Tagalog. There's Tagalog here, but it's predominantly more English now. You know, like I probably have a 60% more English or 70% more English and then 30%, 40% Tagalog, if that's my balance in whenever I code switch between them. But yeah.
Okay. So that would be your like a Taglish version.
Yeah, that would be my percentage of Taglish version, is that predominantly it's more English, and then I would have a 30 percentile of like Tagalog if I remember the words, you know? But in that case, nowadays, now that I'm an adult, I don't speak Tagalog as much other than when I speak with you. We speak in Tagalog a lot. I also speak Tagalog in work, which is kind of nice because I have Filipino colleagues, so we can talk in Tagalog with each other. But other than that, it's just like, I don't even watch TFC anymore at home, which is kind of
Me too.
It's huge...
I don't watch. I mean, I do watch some like videos though in on YouTube. Like especially there's this show called Eat Bulaga, and it's a variety show where they give away prizes, all that stuff. I watch it because when I was a kid, I used to watch that show, and it brings me joy every time I watch it. So every time I watch it with my uncle, you know, it's just like nice that me and my uncle would just like have a conversation about the show basically, and it's nice.
No, I think that's really nice that you used to have that or still have that tradition going. The problem is because I have stopped watching TFC for like a good decade or so, the result of it is detrimental in my Tagalog because I don't speak it anymore, you know? Like, sure, I still talk to my parents and my Lola. I still speak in Tagalog sometimes here and there, but it's not as predominant anymore. And it's so frustrating because it's like, of course, I'm very passionate. I want to speak more, but it's just not happening, you know? But in any case, let's go ahead and move on before we keep going on this tangent. I do enjoy this conversation, like maybe more on this later next time. We're gonna go ahead and jump to the next segment of our discussion. So let's talk about Philippines etymology, right? So for the sake of, again, simplifying the research project that I mentioned in episode 1, we are just gonna stick to English, right? American English and how it influenced the Philippines and whatnot. There is gonna be one major linguist. I don't know if it's a linguist or researcher. Maybe researchers are much more accurate, Norman, to say. It's Gonzalez. I can't remember his first name though. Something Gonzalez.
Okay, yeah, researcher. I think would be appropriate. Okay.
So we have a researcher. His name is Gonzalez, or is it her name? I can't remember. I gotta like look it up. They did a study in 1998. I'm pretty sure it's male because I referred to him as a him in my paper. So Gonzalez in 1998 created a study called the Language Planning Situation in the Philippines. And basically in his study, he highlighted that dialect is considered a misnomer. So answering the question that we left on episode 1, which is, are the languages like Cebuano, Ilocano, Ilonggo, Aclano, and are those also called languages? Dialects. They're actually called languages. So Gonzalez highlighted that dialect is a misnomer when referring to the types of languages in the Philippines. And this mislabeling stemmed from historical, educational, and linguistic policies, influences in the Philippines. The continued misuse of Philippine dialects not only reflected misunderstandings of the distinction between languages and dialects, but also undermined the linguistic diversity of the country. So, in other words, what they're saying is that they're trying to replicate what they know of America, okay? So we know in the US, the American language, the national language of the US is English, right? So, however, we don't talk enough that there are different accents in the U.S. Just the U.S. There are many different U.S. accents, is what I'm trying to say. So basically, we have the Californian accent, right? The one that I have. So I have a Southern Californian. Even going even more specific on geography. Sorry, I can't even say the word. Narrowing even down to geography, it can actually impact how you can pronounce words and your accent, of course. And a lot of the times people, whenever you're asked like, oh, do you notice you have an accent when you speak? People get offended. Like, they're very defensive or they're confused. They're like, there's no way I have an accent. I'm like, everyone in the world has an accent. It's just that you're not aware of it until you move yourself to different locations where you start to notice that you have a different accent. Like, for example, Norman, whenever you speak sometimes, I hear New York accent coming in. Like
New York accent, really?
Yeah, I hear it. Like,
that's interesting.
Yeah, when I was listening to listening and also editing our last discussion with Anna, like some time ago, I was listening to you saying the word New York. The way you say New York has an accent.
Well, how do I say it? New York, like new.
The or sound. The or sound.
Oh, New York.
Yeah, you say. It sounds like you have you slide in an o sound, then or comes in. New York, like that, right? I'm saying it very slowly. I'm also like overdoing it just to show emphasis, but that's how you say it. It's like New York, something like that. But Southern Californians who say New York, like or is very strong. There's no o that's included.
New York.
Yeah, you have an accent.
New York.
Yeah.
Oh, still?
Yeah, you do.
I can't do it.
New York.
You need to write on an IPA, then I can probably pronounce it.
I'll show it to you. If I figure out how to do IPA on this board, I will definitely show it to you one day.
Oh, I should teach you how to do it.
In share screen, so we can show it also in stream too. I'll do it next time because I know how to do it. It's just I didn't have the plugin on this stream for today. Yes, New York. So it would be basically you got new and then yo, and then when you say after yo, that's when you put the turned o, the open c o, and then the That's what I'm saying. New York. Yeah.
It's more open. Okay.
Yeah, you have a more of an open o kind of sound before, like the open o is the same sound as saying tall. So you have that o before or. So New York.
New York. Oh, okay.
Yeah, I hear it though. So I hear it whenever you say that, especially when you're saying anytime you bring up New York, I think your accent comes back from that time when you lived there. I think it comes back subconsciously because it happens to me too.
Oh.
It happens.
I lived there for 4 years, so I think I picked up the accent. So.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. Like wherever you are, you in a sense pick up the language of where you're from. So that's basically what I'm trying to say here. So in other words, going back to the main topic, what I'm trying to point out is it's just like that. Like wherever you are in the world, especially if you're in the US, we have different accents of English. We have a Midwestern English, which is considered the standard English. We have the Southern Californian English, which is very popular in terms of TikTok. We hear it on social media, like Instagram Reels, YouTube. Californian accent is actually quite popular, especially in movies, like films, because we are, especially because, Hollywood. Hollywood is stationed in LA, so because I am in that area, I have the way that they speak in the movies and films. That's why even in the past when I recall it, my students even told me, Miss Hannah, your voice, you sound like you're from a movie. And I'm like, oh, that makes sense now because Hollywood stars are using the Californian accent. That's why it makes sense. So as you can see, language does have everything to influence on accent. And of course, if you go even to Texas, for example, they have a Texas accent. And we always joke about it, saying oh, Texas accent is just really funny how they say stuff. It's very, what do they call it? Redneck, the way they speak too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, redneck might be offensive, not gonna lie.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to make it like that, but that's what I'm saying. It's just there's an accent that we have, and we Americans, we poke fun at other languages, and I don't mean this as to offend anyone in general, and I apologize if I do. But that's...
to be honest though, every states though are making fun of each other. I'm
yes,
pretty
we
sure
do.
Texans are making fun of New Yorkers or Californians.
Oh yes.
So
yeah, in some way we're always making fun of each other. So Yeah, that's exactly what I'm trying to say. So that's the case. So I think that's what Gonzalez was trying to talk about in his study, was that they tried to do something similar into the Philippines. So whoever was the colonizers in the Philippines, they were trying to apply the same thing to the Philippines. So they're saying that Tagalog is the national language. English is like the second national language, right? Because it was forced into their academia. And because of that, any other language that is not learned in the academics, or if it's not Tagalog, everything else is considered a dialect. That's how the history started, was because they undermined the other linguistic diversity in the Philippines. So whenever people say, sorry, let me rephrase that again. So that's why whenever people say that the Philippines has different dialects, like or like Ilonggo is another dialect in the Philippines, it's because you're trying to undermine it as, oh, dialect is lower than Tagalog. That's essentially what's happening. Does that make sense? Yeah.
And basically, they probably, and yeah, of course, and basically they don't know that the other languages in the Philippines are actually languages. It's because they think that it sounds similar to Tagalog, where they think that, oh, it's just like a dialect of Tagalog.
Yes.
Because
exactly.
they don't speak the language.
Exactly. So it's just like that whole saying, okay, this is a really bad joke, but I'm gonna bring it up. Who was it? Who was that comedian, that famous comedian? Jokoy. How he said about his dad said,
Jokoy.
Yeah, Jokoy, how his dad said rice is rice. It doesn't matter, rice is rice.
Oh God, right.
You see what
I
I'm
saw that
saying?
video.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
It's just a funny thing, but it's also in a way kind of a little bit racist and offensive. It's kind of that feeling with the Philippines.
It is racist.
Yeah. So if you are someone who is not from the Philippines and you hear different Philippine languages, they're all gonna sound the same to you. So it kind of ties into that saying, rice is rice. Philippine language is still it sounds like Tagalog. It's Tagalog. It's not Tagalog. It's a different language.
Yeah, and think about this. So, think that hypothetically that Philippines merges with Indonesia as a new country, right?
Yes.
And since a lot of people in Indonesia speaks Indonesian, and when you meet someone who actually speaks Tagalog and you don't know anything about that language, you would think that, oh, Tagalog is just a dialect of Indonesian because they sound basically the same.
Exactly.
But again, we don't understand each other.
Exactly. Say it loud and proud for the people in the back. Oh my God, we get confused all the time, and it's funny because we are Austronesian. We're an Austronesian language family, and we share the same words, like Brunei, Malaysia, Indonesia, and the Philippines. We share some of the same words. Like we say the word like sayang is the same word for a lot of us. Like sayang basically means love. In Indonesian, sayang is also love in some parts of the Philippine language. And then there's also, let me see, also Brunei also uses that, and Malaysian uses sayang too.
But sayang in Tagalog means, what does it mean? Like, it's like, what a waste.
Yes, that's a Tagalog one. But there's another version when I looked up into other, when I looked into other like Philippine languages, they actually use the word sayang and it actually means love. I was shocked by that.
Okay.
So
I wonder what language is.
I'm actually gonna pull it. I'm gonna pull it up and like look into it. Where is sayang used in Tagalog? Means love. Sayang means love in Tagalog. It might be even archaic.
Not Tagalog.
Maybe it's deep Tagalog, there's also like, I remember like the Philippines had this one teleserie where they had Bagani. It was my last TFC drama that I watched. So here it says, while sayang is not a direct translation of love in Tagalog, it can be used in ways to express love or affection. There you go. It says here.
How would you use it?
So sayang often expresses regret or pity. That's the one we know. When something precious is lost or wasted, you might say, ay, sayang. This can extend to relationships. So, for example, if a romantic opportunity is missed, you might say, sayang, implying regret and perhaps hinting at deeper feelings. So it's still tied to love. It's just, if you see it this way, It's just semantically it changed.
It's
There's a-
semantically changed,
shifted.
basically.
Yeah. It's
Yeah,
yes, it's
it's
shifted.
shifted.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So the word sayang actually applies to Indonesian and the Philippines. I don't know about Malaysia. I hope Malaysia because I heard that there before, but correct me if I'm wrong. Brunei, I don't know if sayang is also used there, so I apologize if I'm incorrect. Call me out, guys. If I'm wrong, just call me out. But yeah, I know for sure in Indonesia and the Philippines because I spent some time in Indonesia, so I noticed there was a lot of words that I mix up. So yeah. It says that sayang originally is like a shared language in Austronesian family, like amongst those four that I just mentioned. And in the Philippines, it's still tied to some sort of feeling related to love, you know? Like, oh, what a shame, like something's lost or deep regret, whatever. But it's just has a semantic shift. So now it has experience. Okay, I actually have this all listed down, Norman, because I was so into your class. I really love semantics. Semantics was so fun for me. Do you remember what we
that
call
class was fun.
it? Sorry.
Huh?
Do you remember what kind of semantic shift took place?
So the word sayang, I would say, I kind of want to say pejoration because
Pejoration.
Mm,
Pejoration
let me
is
see.
yes, I can see that. Okay, pejoration's one direction because sayang used to be like because the word sayang itself is a positive, but it has become more of a negative statement in Tagalog. So we would say like, oh, what a shame, what a pity. I guess
Yeah,
yes, it could be
exactly.
argued as a pejoration. So pejoration means basically when a word takes up more of a negative connotation. That's what it means in semantics.
Yeah, I can't think of anything else though.
There's
It's
another
been a
one.
long time.
I know what it is because I wrote it down in my notes. So give me 1 second. I'm just so excited just hearing this, and I really hope I'm not like hurting our time or anything because I have it all in front of me. Let's see.
And I just need to look for it.
Yes, that's it. I found it. Ha 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 ha. I found it. Okay. So we have semantics jargon. So changes over time. We have, I think this is a case in terms of the Philippines from sayang to change into the way it is in the Philippines. It's narrowing. This refers to the process where a term becomes more specific in meaning, often by excluding certain possibilities or narrowing its scope, right? So in the Philippines now, it's used in terms of what a missed opportunity, negative, regret. So it changed into narrowing in a way. It's no longer widening. You said
I would say narrowing. Yeah.
Yeah. And then we have pejoration, which is, like you mentioned, it changed and became a more negative connotation over time. Another one I was thinking of is, let's see, not familiarization, because it's a word expression becomes more informal of casual in its meaning. Kind of, but not really. Which is not related to it. Oh, okay. Metonymy. Metonymy, a figure of speech in which a word or phrase refers to something else related to it. Because it is related to love in a way, you know, how it's being applied. Metonymy, maybe.
But maybe, but the word sayang now, we use it for like when we say sayang, we don't think of love.
Yeah.
I don't know.
That's so true.
Maybe a part of it, probably.
Yeah.
I mean, again, this is like we can actually debate this all day
Yeah.
or all night, but again, it's kind of hard to say for
Yeah.
now.
Okay.
Because it could be either or. It's actually so, guys. When it comes to like semantic shifts, and when we talk about what kind of semantic shifts happen to a word, you can actually argue it all day because there's a lot of things that you need to consider, specifically time, or is the language is still using that word to have to carry the same meaning. So again, maybe
Yeah, I looked into it more as well, and also I know we have to cut it short because we're going off tangent for a bit on this, but I promise this is the last thing.
we have to
Synecdoche.
move on.
Synecdoche. So synecdoche basically means, sorry, not a figure of speech. Yeah, a figure of speech in which is used to refer to the whole or vice versa. Maybe, but
Yeah, I
definitely
think that's kind of like same thing as
metonymy.
metonymy.
And also, I think the one that makes the most sense, other than narrowing, is displacement. This refers to the process by which a word or phrase shifts its meaning, often due to changes in context or cultural shift. There you go. it's a displacement and probably
I think that would be displacement.
yeah, narrowing and displacement. I would argue
More
for it.
like
Okay,
Yeah.
so we'll move on now because I know we went off tangent on this.
moving on.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just got really excited whenever I hear that. We're going back, finally going back to the main topic regarding with dialects. So, in any case, you can see how we went off tangent on that thing. So, ultimately, the bottom line is what Gonzalez was trying to call out with the colonizers who made the decision to call English and Tagalog the main languages. They called everything else a dialect, meaning that it is a lower version, a non-standard. I think that's what I think is probably what they assumed, that it's not a standard or not a popular voice that's used in the country. Therefore, they are more little, like by far little, than the ones that are chosen, you know? This was probably the mindset of them. And again, this is all just speculation, guys, because the people who colonized the Philippines, I don't know if they're dead now, so we don't really know what they were thinking when they colonized the Philippines way back then. So another reference I will bring up is Gonzalez 2017, same person, I believe. He made another study called Language Contact in the Philippines. This one highlights how Americans and how they colonized the Philippines via education. This is very significant because, as we all know, the English language is in the system. It's actually in the study that I learned that when the Americans took over the Philippines, one of the first things they did was incorporate English as a language in the classroom. If they didn't do that, English wouldn't have become this popular or this like really tied into education in the Philippines. And another thing to show on that is that the Philippines actually, the way that it was like presented was a school is not considered a school if there is no English classroom in it. It actually says in the study that one of the Chinese schools, you know, like there was a lot of like Filipino Chinese communities in the Philippines. The thing was, a lot of them were traders. They were merchants, and some other parts of Chinese immigrants in the Philippines is because they were running away from the what was happening in in China. I forgot what it was called, man. Politics. We're running into politics. I can't even think straight now. Sorry. So yeah, they were running away from whatever political problem that was happening in China. So they ran away as, you know, just refugees into the Philippines. So they tried to make their own pidgin language of Filipino Chinese, and they came up with I wish I remember the word. I don't have my notes in front of me. But they had a Filipino Chinese mix kind of language that was introduced, and that's why they have Filipino communities in the Philippines that are like Chinese. You know, that's where it came from. It was because of these people who ran away as immigrants. I mean, as refugees. Or they were also traders or merchants who were there trading for a long time, and then they just created a small community of Chinese Filipinos. That's why we have a lot of Chinese Filipino people in our country. Another thing that I want to highlight in terms of
and that's why we celebrate Chinese New Year.
Yes, that's why, because we have a lot of Chinese stemmed into our culture. Even for me, even in my history, my ancestry, even my grandmother told me like, yeah, we have like Chinese Filipinos, Chinese mestizas inside our family ancestry too, which is interesting. So another thing I wanted to point out was because there was a lot of like stigma and also marginalization happening in the Philippines, especially with different cultures that were staying in the Philippines. They tried to structure everything, which is kind of their way. Like, they got it from the Spanish people. When the Spanish came to the Philippines, they introduced structuralization. So they were trying to make this hierarchy of who is on top, who's the prestige, who's the bottom, blah blah blah. With the Americans being on the top when they were colonizing the Philippines, English is considered the prestigious language, right? The more American or more fluent in English, the higher the class you're in. And then if you know Tagalog, you're kind of in that upper crust area, but not exactly in the highest part where it's like you speak a very high knowledge of Tagalog and English. If you only know Tagalog, you're considered educated, because as far as I know in my interviews, everyone had to learn Tagalog in their classes, you know, so it's mandatory. So English and Tagalog were mandatory course subjects in the Philippines. So you had to learn both of them anywhere you were. But the interesting thing was different times I mean, the interesting thing was that it was introduced at different periods for everyone. Depending on where you're from, you learn the language at a different time, which was actually quite interesting to talk about. Maybe we can do that for episode 3 in the future, because there's just a lot to talk about in this segment alone. But with that being said, we can go on and move on to the next video, which it's actually an interview. I got the permission from my Lola, my mom, and my dad, because I asked them if they could answer the question, which is what I asked you guys on the last episode. It's when you fill in the blank, the spoken words that people say, or the different variation of spoken languages in the Philippines. So you call them Philippine languages or Philippine dialects. So with that being said, I'm gonna go ahead and play the audio. Let me go ahead and mute this first so you can hear the audio. And it's the next one. This is my Lola. What do you call it in the Philippines, yung mga linguas nila? There are many Filipino languages, or there are many Filipino dialects?
Pareho.
Pareho sila. Sa'yo? Okay, so they're the same to you.
Ha?
Pareha sila yung mga...
Oo.
They're same to you. Oh, okay. Interesting. Okay. Okay, so you can see here, Norman. Notice how Lola answered it. She said they were the same to her. And granted, just know Lola is like in the early 1910s, 1910s to or maybe late 1910s. Because Lola is like in her 80s now. No. I'm doing it wrong. I'm sorry. I don't know the year where my Lola is from, unfortunately. But you can see from Lola's time, she sees language and dialects are the same. They're interchangeable to her. What do you think, Norman?
So for that one, I would say that she lives in a time where it was introduced, where they introduced Tagalog as a language, and the others are dialects.
Yes.
Because, that would be the time where they decided that the other languages, the other regional languages in the Philippines are actually dialects, and Tagalog would be the main, the primary language, where the other dialects, quote unquote, spread throughout the Philippines.
Yes, exactly. So you can see, like, from Lola's time, she honestly didn't have an understanding of if there was a difference or a clarification there. It was just, here's the standard. She just accepted it for what it is. And of course, just to give some background about Lola, Lola didn't go to school. I think Lola did go to school, but she didn't go any higher than maybe high school, I think. And that's when she stopped. So yeah, Lola, it was in a different time, you know, like education was different in her time period. But when she raised my mom, education was important because it could change what it was, or it could change the status for people. So it was very interesting to see how this was affecting Lola in terms of this was her perception of it, and she didn't really see a difference. So of course, during my interview, there was kind of a language boundary between us, because Lola couldn't, like, she could express herself better in Tagalog. Sometimes when I'm asking her questions in English, she doesn't understand what I'm saying. And I also have my brain fog, so I have difficulty trying to say things in Tagalog to her. So it's just sometimes a little bit of a language boundary between us. And you also heard in the beginning, I was telling her the linguas in the Philippines as well. That's what I was trying to express.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So next we're gonna look at, I believe it's my mom who's the next one. Oh no, it's my dad. This is very interesting. Here is my dad's interview. And I believe my dad's brother is also heard in this audio, so you'll hear him explain. Complete the following sentence. There are many Filipino blanks spoken in the Philippines. Would you say dialects or languages?
Dialect. Language is the Filipino, the Tagalog.
Okay. So which one did you choose though? Dialects or languages? So there are many Filipino blanks spoken in
There are many Filipino dialects spoken in the Philippines.
Why did you choose that word?
Because it's the word dialect, it's not language.
Why?
Language is like English, the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
Dialect is for each specific particular region.
Mm-hmm.
you're identified with your dialect. When you say, Gagigi Gugo, oh, you're from Aklan. See, that's a dialect. You didn't say that's a language.
No.
Hmm?
Aklanon is a language. Ilonggo is a language. Because a language, it has its own sentence structure, it has its own grammar. That's amazing. That's how amazing Philippines is.
Confusing na kung magsiling language,
ang
bilog ang Philippines. Ang bilog ang language ang Pilipino. What are they?
Philippines has lots of languages. It is not only Tagalog.
Hindi. Dialect tawag sila.
So interesting, right? Like my dad's having this discourse with his brother. They had a whole discourse.
Very interesting.
Right? You see? Do you see how they were taught?
Man, that is interesting. Yeah. So, when it comes to your dad, though, I think this is when they said that from the way he answered the question, he was born in the era when American says that, okay, the other languages in the Philippines are dialects, and that what is being taught in school, and that was passed on to him.
Yes.
But your uncle, though, probably was born around that time, but probably he was probably did some research, and that's why he said that no, Aklanun is its own language because it has its own grammar structure and all those things.
Yes. And actually, what's interesting is after this whole interview, my whole family had this whole debate on it, like come Christmas and stuff, because we talked about this research project. And it's very interesting to hear the discourse on it. Like everyone's talking about, okay, what do you think about? Is it a language or is it a dialect? So just like you mentioned,
I'm kind of jealous now with you because I kind of want to hear what your dad was gonna say and what your uncle is gonna say. It's gonna be a good debate.
Yes.
I'm pretty sure.
So basically, this is a clash of what are you learned with. I see it. Like, whatever you're taught in school, it's going to stick with you, of course. So that becomes your belief. So there is influence in what you're being taught. And I think it's because of this misnomer, this mislabel, because my dad went to school in the 1960s, right? He was born in the late 1950s. And he grew up in the 1960s and 70s. So during that time, the establishment of how learning English or Tagalog in the classroom is much different. And of course, I feel like this study is so interesting, and we'll go more into it maybe in episode 3 in the future, because it's just so interesting to see, like, compare when did everyone learn English or Tagalog or Ilonggo, because that's the 3 that we're comparing here. And I just decided to throw in English into the mix because I wanted to see how it would influence the other languages. But in any case, the main concern is just like Tagalog and Ilonggo. But as you can see here, this little side quest that I was investigating, it just goes to show as to like how did they perceive it that way. So my dad is a very confident man. He's very sure of what he learns, and you can see the way that he carries himself in this video. He really believes that any other versions, like he sees and acknowledges that Ilonggo is a dialect of Tagalog. And for my uncle who's outside of the video there, he mentioned that it's not true because, like you mentioned, perhaps someone educated him. Maybe he learned it later that he realized, the Philippines doesn't have many dialects. It has many different languages, because I like how my uncle said at the very end, that's how diverse and intricate the Philippine languages are, because we have so many languages that visit the Philippines and they make their own community, that we have different variations. We have like over hundreds of different Philippine languages. And a lot of the time, just like you mentioned, they are not documented, especially the smaller communities. They're not documented, so it gets lost. And then sometimes even they might even die, like you mentioned earlier. Or was it the last episode that you mentioned that? So it's really important to acknowledge that. Yeah. Okay. So the last one now we can go over is my mom's. Okay, so next video, this is my mom's interview. All right, now this is number 11. Complete the following sentence. There are many Filipino blank spoken in the Philippines. Would you say dialects or languages? And why would you choose that word?
we were taught their dialects, but as I go on, learn about it was languages. But it was dialect. That's the norm. The norm
From back then.
back then.
Interesting.
There are many Filipinos. We call the different
What do you call it?
Ilocano, Bicolano, those words, Ilonggo. We call it dialect. And we were not aware that it's not a dialect.
Okay. So which one do you believe it is now, Ma?
I believe it's a language.
Language.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting, because Daddy said dialect. You said language. Lola said either or. You guys had different answers. It's very interesting to hear that.
Because I learned it from you, Hannah.
Oh, yeah.
When you were studying.
Yeah, I
that-
told you.
you told me that. Mommy,
language.
it's not dialect.
It's a language.
It's a language.
Yeah, because people would get upset. It makes sense too, because historically, Ma, when you say dialect, it sounds like you're being colonized. You're lower beneath something. Like, for example, there's American British, there's English British, and there's Australian British.
There's a wrong use of that and perception in the Philippines.
Yeah.
When you speak different,
Dialect.
we call it dialect.
It makes them feel less
The
than.
language to us is either Tagalog or English only.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, but the other forms of speaking, like by regional, or by provincial languages, we call it dialect.
Yeah, so it becomes.
then.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's feels like a misnomer that actually relates into tension, Ma. That's why there's a lot of tension amongst different Filipino languages. It's actually part of it. Interesting. All right. Okay. So what do you think about my mom's response?
Well, I'm pretty sure that your mom was born at the same time with around the time when your dad was born. But she did mention that that the languages are actually called Philippine languages, and she learned it from you.
Yeah.
So basically, probably the same thing. But your mom is more a little open-minded compared to your dad, because your dad was actually insisting that the other languages in Philippines are dialect, but your mom was more open-minded, and she says, "Oh, okay, it's actually called languages, not dialects." So,
Yes.
yeah,
Exactly.
interesting.
Yeah, because I was very insistent on it too. I'm similar to my dad. We're both very we're very convinced. We're conviction. Yeah, hard-headed and conviction. We have very strong convictions. I guess you would say. So I would say my dad was very tied onto the whole ideology of how he was taught, whereas my mom is more she's flexible, because I was telling her, I'm like, no, Mom, as a linguist, I can tell you it's actually Philippine languages, and I feel like I do want to force this whole correction on it, because I want everyone to know that calling a language that's not Tagalog or Ilonggo, calling any other languages from Tagalog and English, if you call it like Ilonggo, Naklanon, they're also languages. They're not dialects. Of course, like you mentioned earlier, I think it was in the last episode, that there are some regional dialects of a language in the Philippines, but that's actually kind of hard to label, considering that the Philippines has a lot of I guess you could say there is a lot of languages in the Philippines that are kind of pigeonized in a way. Do you see what I'm kind of arguing here? I don't know if it makes sense. Like pigeonized, that means they combine their version with another version. Like for example, you said there was a Bacolod verse and a Tagalog Bacolod version. It's like a mix of the two of them. There's also a Davao version, a Davao Tagalog version that they mix Davao.
The Davao Filipino,
that's it. So what they do is they mix Davao with Tagalog. So it's like another pidgin language, kind of in a way.
It was actually Cebuano in Davao, and they mixed it with Tagalog.
Yes.
Because what happened is that there's actually a lot of Tagalogs that actually moved to Davao, where they speak Cebuano. And what happened is that young people are starting to pick up Tagalog, because they see Tagalog as prestigious. It's one of the prestigious languages, and that actually mixed in with Cebuano as they speak, basically.
Exactly. And on top of that, remember, power of communication, of social media also plays a huge influence on that too, considering that in the Philippines they use Tagalog when they're talking on the news, right? They're also using Tagalog in social media in the Philippines. Maybe even Taglish actually might be more accurate. And because there's a higher need of that want for being being part of social media and just wanting to have that voice and stand out and be a part of this group, it kind of encourages this whole acclamation in a sense that they want more people to speak more Taglish on social media, because that is the powerful voice that's coming from that community, right? And a lot of young people are being pulled into that direction, that they talk like this, I want to talk like this. Like I guess another example that I wanted to point out was how in the not just the Philippines, if you are from a different part of the world and you're watching a lot of English content, you're consuming a lot of English content, like let's say TikTok, English speakers, Americans, they are going to develop that kind of English version too. It doesn't mean that they had to live in America. Sometimes listening, especially at a young age, you can acquire the accent by just mimicking, by listening, like continuous exposure to that language. You do somehow, in a way, acquire the language because you are spending time with that person. And I am very I'm for this, because when I lived in Indonesia for 6 months, I can tell you, in 3 months' time, my English started to pick up the Indonesian English accent. I started to speak just like my friends. It was very interesting how that phenomenon happened. So same thing happens when I talk to my Tagalog-speaking friends. When I talk to you and I switch back to English, you might even hear me having a Tagalog accent in my English. It happens. It's because if you are in a certain environment that encourages you to speak a certain way, or if you hear it enough, you start to mimic it subconsciously without thinking. I think if I had stayed longer than 6 months in Indonesia, I might have successfully acquired the Indonesian English accent. Because a lot of my friends, I was so used to hearing those words and expressions so much in conversation and discourse that I started to talk like them too. It was very interesting how that phenomenon worked. So yeah, I thought that was really, really interesting, and this conversation has been very fantastic. I really enjoyed this conversation with you. And do you think maybe we should do an episode 3 on this?
Do we have to? I mean, if we have more thing to talk about, then yeah. I'm for it.
Absolutely. I think I'm really interested in what we talked about regarding when do you learn the language, or when do you learn English or Tagalog. That's something I do want to bring up in a next stream, because I know we are short on time and you have to go somewhere. But I really want to have a conversation on that, and I think a lot of people might be interested in hearing where did they, or when did they learn Tagalog? When did they learn English? Because everyone's experience is different. It covers it affects so many factors. For example, whether or not you live in a city just like Manila. My mom grew up in Manila. She acquired English and Tagalog much faster compared to my dad, who lived in Ilonggo. I mean, in Iloilo and Aklanon. His was different in that experience. He learned English much later.
I do want to share my experience on how I picked up the languages, the difficulties that I had when I was a kid on learning languages. I just want to say that.
Yeah, we can do that for episode 3. What do you think? Because I know we're out of time for now.
I unfortunately don't have any time right now.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm down.
Okay. So I think last 2 questions. What do these videos reveal? We just answered that. What does this reveal? It was definitely the culture and the influence of power. Whoever was dictating the importance of learning a language, it influenced the person. And it shows that the different times does definitely affect how one perceives whether the languages that are spoken in the Philippines are perceived as languages or dialects. So that's what these videos reveal, is that across the era, they have different perceptions. And on top of that, not just the era, but also the location where they're from. Everyone's location in the Philippines is going to be a slightly different experience, I believe. That is my hypothesis, and that's what we will definitely explore in the next episode. That being said, I guess this is our last question for our listeners who are listening in today. So now that you guys know all of this, so what do you call Bisaya, Cebuano, Aklanon, etc.? Any other languages in the Philippines? Are they called Philippine dialects, or are they Philippine languages? And that being said, that is the end of our episode 2 of the TFP. And we'd like to thank you guys for hanging in there and listening in to our very, very in-depth and linguistic conversation on the languages of the Philippines. Any last words, Norman?
Nothing, pretty much. I hope you did enjoy it, because I actually had a lot of fun talking about this too. Especially sharing my own experience when it comes to this one. I hope you guys enjoyed it.
Yeah, same here. We hope you guys enjoyed our conversation. And of course, if you guys had a similar experience or something different, please leave some comments below for us. We would love to read them and discuss them in the next few episodes. And that being said, we wish you all a good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Stay hydrated, eat something. Norman has to get going. So with that being said, see you guys next time, and thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.
Bye.